Welcome to today's Mini Perspectives, which will take the place of our normal full show just for a couple of days until we're back in full force next week. Now, today's Mini Perspectives, we take a look at an interesting article that's just appeared in one of our more widely read newspapers. This is the Daily Telegraph here in the UK. And it's an interesting article because the Daily Telegraph sits, generally speaking, on the right of centre, politically speaking. It tends to represent and speak to its slightly right of centre audience. And it tends, on the whole, generally speaking, to side with India, and particularly the right-wing politics of the BJP and Narendra Modi. But an article appeared just a few days ago. It was an opinion piece by one of their regular journalists, a guy called Tom Sharp. And the headline is actually quite provocative and really quite interesting. It's very unusual, as I say, for a newspaper, particularly even a British newspaper. And the headline says, "India is an enemy, not a friend or a neutral." And it goes on to say, there's a nation largely armed by Russia and which bankrolls Putin. What else would you call it? Well, again, as I say, the Daily Telegraph and certainly the right-wing conservative elements of British politics tends, I would say by default, to side with the Indian BJP, who likewise are sort of right of centre over in India. So again, it's quite, it certainly goes against the flow to see an article actually calling India as an enemy. And again, I often talk about how the British establishment is very much aligned with the Indian establishment. The Indian establishment, of course, read the RSS, the Hindu, the nationalist extremists. Again, it's the right wing of Indian nationalism that the British establishment tends to align with. And again, this dates back even back to 1947, when the British Empire passed over control of India to the Brahmanical elite, the Brahmanical upper caste rulers of India, who've essentially maintained control of the subcontinent, essentially just inheriting it from the British Empire. Again, this is all the context of why this article just sits a little bit unusual, because again, the Daily Telegraph tends to be, not even slightly, I would say, tends to be on the whole pretty pro-establishment. So again, it flies in the face of the normal pro-establishment position of the British government and the British establishment. Now, Tom's article, it says, he starts off saying that India has just commissioned a new warship, the INS Tamal, and she's the latest in the line of 8 Talwar-class stealth frigates. She's very well armed, and it includes a BrahMos anti-ship and land attack missile. Theoretically, a beast of a weapon with a range of over 500 miles. It can send missiles of up to Mach 3, that's 3 times the speed of sound. And it actually, it has, these missiles are actually far in excess of anything that we even have here in the UK. But, as he says, there is a problem. All is not as it seems. These missiles, the Tamal missiles, were actually, not the missiles, the actual vessel itself, the warship, was built by Russia in one of their shipyards in Kaliningrad. Now, ships built by Russia and supplied to India is actually not news. We do know, we've often reported on this channel, how the historical ties between Delhi and Moscow run very deep. We do know that even since partition in 1947, that the KGB in Moscow had its claws in India. As soon as the British left that huge vacuum in India, the KGB in Moscow were in there like nobody's business. They were straight in. The Gandhi dynasty were effectively bankrolled by the KGB, and their whole power, their powerful dynasty was propped up by Moscow. And hence that has continued ever since. And the Indian government has had long and deep ties and financial ties to Moscow. And so, of course, it's not unusual then, it's not surprising, as this article says, it's not news that a lot of arms, a lot of military assets have been supplied by Moscow. Now, as I say, the Navy has primarily been supplied by Russia. It already has an aircraft carrier. 50% of their submarines and this Talwar class of vessels accounts for about 20% of the Indian fleet, all from Russia. Many of these programs date back decades, but of course the international climate has changed rather a lot. And it says, or he says, India's dependence on Russia for warships is reducing now at last. But should it not already be close to zero? That's a big question he's asking. In other words, he's asking this question, look, India, why is it close to Moscow? It should be aligning with the West. I think that actually belies a little bit of naivety on behalf of this journalist. I don't think he realises. Clearly, he doesn't know his Indian history and the ties between India and Moscow, because, of course, as I've just said, those ties run very deep and very historically. That is why India will not let go of its strings to Moscow. And as he continues, and again, this is a subject that we've often talked about, this sort of hypocrisy of Narendra Modi's government. India's trade in Russian oil reeks of duplicity, he says. Despite Western sanctions, India's refineries guzzle discounted crude. In other words, they are buying Indian oil at a discount, often shipped by what he calls dark fleet vessels, dodging and falsifying their tracking information. By actively engaging with this trade, New Delhi flouts global rules, reaping economic rewards while feigning neutrality. In other words, what he's saying, look, Narendra Modi is saying one thing, oh yeah, of course we're neutral in all this, but of course, meanwhile, behind the scenes, he's secretly buying Russian oil. There's no secret about it. Everybody knows it's the worst kept secret in the region. And the Indian government's silence on sanctioned oil flowing through India and through its ports betrays a calculated dodge of accountability, undermining efforts to choke Russia's war chest. India is financing Putin's atrocities, as he said. So again, he's making no bones about this. He's very, very clear, saying, look, India is deliberately following an agenda of saying one thing to the West, but very deliberately, as we say in the UK, sticking two fingers up to the West behind the scenes and buying Russian oil, and by doing that, bankrolling Putin's war against Ukraine. And he refers to this dark fleet. And this dark fleet, these are the vessels that operate on very questionable legality. From insurance purposes, they are old, tired vessels, they're a danger. They could cause all sorts of environmental catastrophes because they are old, tired, barely insured vessels. And they're only insured by India under instructions from Russia, again, highlighting these ties between Russia and Delhi. But meanwhile, as he says, Modi visited Moscow recently. We saw him, we've even showed pictures of him physically embracing Vladimir Putin in recent months. And in his last visit, these dark fleet deals were signed. We do know that more deals were signed between Putin and Modi to ship Russian oil around the world to India. And it was actually only reduced when the US got involved. The US obviously knew that this was going on Trump's administration, and his predecessor actually at the time, or at least those who were speaking on behalf of President Biden, realised this was going on, and they put some pressure on Modi and said, look, you've got to stop this, or else you are going to face sanctions yourself. But Modi's refusal to address this issue, or the state of these vessels that is shipping this crude around it, as he said, it shows a man who doesn't care about right and wrong, only money. He's quite willing to finance Putin if it means cheaper oil. In this, and this is interesting, no ambiguity in this article. It says, in this, he is an enemy of the West, not a friend and not neutral. Militarily, the dependence on Russian equipment doesn't make much sense either. And he goes on to say, how poor Russian kit generally is. We do know that Russia is still fighting a war against Ukraine. So its focus, its industrial production focus, is on producing material, military assets, ammunition, arms, whatever, to feed its war machine fighting in Ukraine. The last thing it can really do is actually provide assets or material to India. And particularly the fact that India is now operating lots and lots of old Russian-supplied military machinery. It can't get spare parts, or it's very hard to get spare parts from Russia because, of course, the Russian industrial machine is feeding its own war machine to fight the Ukraine war. So again, it's India. It doesn't make sense from that perspective. And then Tom, the journalist, goes on about he actually rode on one of these vessels, and he actually realised, he said, when the vessel had to slow down to 10 knots, a fairly standard naval speed for submarine hunting, apparently, the vessel couldn't do it. And he talks in his article about how they actually had to put sentries along the funnels of the ship on fire watch, because when they go that slowly, it could potentially cause the ship to burst into flames because it's so badly built. This Russian-built ship is so badly designed and so poor quality that if it tries to maintain a slow speed for submarine hunting, it potentially could burst into flames. I mean, I'm laughing, but this is the state of the Indian Navy as supplied by Russia. And then he then talks about trying to supply the spare parts and what a problem that is. But basically, he finished his article in summary to say, Indian dependence on Russian weapons is slowly reducing, but it could not be clearer that this isn't from any desire to do the right thing. New Delhi's unhelpful practices around illegal Russian oil are rapidly increasing. And he said, basically, it's India first and the rest of you be damned. Soon India is going to have to choose a side, or we're going to have to treat them the way they're basically treating us, as an enemy. Now, that final statement actually echoes things that we've been saying on this channel for a long, long time, is that India has to choose sides. It is playing all sides against each other and has been doing for years. I don't blame India for doing that. It's, you know, if you can get away with it, and as long as you can get away with it, great. It does your nation, perhaps serves its best interest. But there does come a point when you do have to choose sides. And that has come up in recent times. The Pahalgam attacks actually brought up this question, well, whose side actually are you on? And again, the historic ties to Moscow repeatedly keep coming up in so many of these issues. And again, the West is saying, whose side are you on? Are you on the Western democracies' side? Are you aligning with Western democracies like Europe, the UK, United States, New Zealand, Australia, etc., the Five Eyes nations? Or are you going to revert back to your historic ties to Russia, to authoritarian regimes like China, even Iran, these BRICS economies? Is that where you see your future? And that is the big question. And it's interesting, as I say, as I open this story up, the Daily Telegraph is a British establishment mouthpiece in many ways. Even this mouthpiece of the British establishment is saying, look, India, it's time. You've got to choose sides. You can't keep playing this game. If you don't choose us, by default, you are our enemy. In other words, if you want to side with Russia, that is your prerogative, that is your choice, but you make an enemy of the West. So there it is, a bit of a stark choice for Narendra Modi. No doubt he's going to try and tread this fine line for as long as he can. But ultimately, as we keep saying on this channel, he is going to have to choose sides. And more voices are joining this journalist in the British establishment saying, you can't keep getting away with this. You've got to pin your flag to one mast. It's either the mast of democracy or it is the mast of authoritarianism. Your choice, Mr. Modi, or the choice of the Brahmanical elite who control India. We'll see. As we often say, we will report the results on the channel here at Satluj TV News. So there you have it. That's it for another day and indeed another week. Do watch out for my podcast tomorrow, which will be released tomorrow around about the morning time of UK time. So do have a look out for that. In the meantime, let us know your thoughts on this story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. You do know we love to talk about your comments. And we'll be back in all being well, God willing, in full force with a full perspectives back on Monday morning next week. Until then, have a great week, everybody. We will see you next time.